We're in Krakow now. That's Michelle. That's Professor Chapman. Jaleesa Price, Heather Vasquez, and the Wild Jen Wild.
Hello.
Okay. Enjoying a nice leisurely lunch before our first guided tour of wonderful Krakow. We're in Old Town Square. The building in the distance there behind that head is Cloth Hall, which is where merchants used to sell cloth. Today it's a market where you can buy all kind of souvenirs, trinkets, amber, which is very popular here.
Are you? Yeah, some of us bought them. Excellent. Yeah, so you can see the actual physical mezuzah, like the one you bought, it's not there anymore. The family that lived here most likely took it down when they were sent to the ghetto. But the scar remains. You can find these all over Central and Eastern Europe. And sometimes, I mean, you blink and you miss them. Or if you don't know exactly what a mezuzah is, you would never know what this meant. But generally when you see these, you can think, oh, it's a mezuzah, and that's a really good sign that a Jewish family lived here, because only Jewish people put up mezuzahs, for example. One of the biggest challenges we have, besides not just commemorating the Holocaust, but what do we do about these traces of memory? Not just these big things, synagogues and cemeteries. Since this photograph has been taken in the city of Tarnów, this building has been renovated and the door frame was taken out. And so that trace of memory is gone. And so one of the big questions here going forward is, how do we preserve these traces in small places, in big cities, but also what about these small things as well? But the main point in this section is really to drive home the local aspect of the Holocaust, to go beyond saying just the Holocaust happened, period, end of sentence, because we know that. What we really want to emphasize is that the Holocaust happened here, and that its effects are still felt in these towns and villages in this country to this day. I'm sure you've heard the statistic a few times, but in 1939 there were 3.5 million Jews living in Poland. They were 10% of the population. That is a massive minority. They were actually the second largest ethnic national minority in this country. And they were very, very visible, with a different language, a different religion, looking a bit different than the rest of society, so a very visible minority as well. During the Second World War, 90% of Polish Jewry was murdered. That's 9% of the population, annihilated, virtually overnight, because 6 years of occupation, 1939 to 45, is a blink of an eye in history. In towns and villages, in cities like Krakow, this was even more traumatic, because Jews weren't just 10% of a given town. In Krakow, they were 25% of the population. 1/4 of this city was Jewish before the war, 90% of them gone. In this town, Dąbrowa Tarnowska, with this massive, beautiful synagogue, which is actually about 2 minutes off the main square, the Jews were 40% of the population. There were towns in Poland that were 50, 60, 70% Jewish. What happens in a town when that kind of a population is annihilated? It changes everything. Even if these people didn't go over to each other's houses for dinner, they still interacted with each other in the marketplace, on the street. The kids would go to school together. That entire way of life that had been developing in these places for hundreds and hundreds of years was gone, completely destroyed. So you can think of these ruins not just as the remnants of a genocide, the monuments to these vanished communities, which they certainly are, but also very symbolic of the lingering trauma of the Second World War. Because these synagogues in particular are right in the center of town. Jews have historically lived right in towns and villages. And so mainly their synagogues are right in the center of town. Like I said, this one in Dąbrowa is right in the center. You can see the apartment blocks surrounding this synagogue in Cieszanów. People see these places every day when they're eating breakfast, coming home from work, going to school, and so on. Sometimes that leads to eventually these places getting taken care of. Romanów has been restored, Dąbrowa Tarnowska has just been finished being restored. But in this case, in Cieszanów, the roof has collapsed since this picture is taken. In 5 years, it's just going to be a pile of bricks. So this is where it connects once again to our other question in this section. How do we preserve these traces of memory? What do we do with them when they're really far off the tourist track and not just here in Krakow? Go down this way. It's always very difficult for me to pick out which pictures to talk about, because I love all of them, and all of them tell their own story. So you all have been to the main square here in Krakow, right? The Rynek? And have you seen Wawel Castle up on the hill?
We just arrived a couple hours ago. We arrived in time for lunch.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
We ate and came straight here.
Oh, fantastic.
You're our first stop.
So when you all, well, I'm sure you'll go to the old town, and you'll see Wawel. This synagogue is on Grodzka Street, which is the street that runs from Wawel up to the main square. And this is to remember that Jews didn't just live in Kazimierz. For a long time that was true, but starting in the 19th century, Jews moved out of Kazimierz and moved all over the city. And they would establish their prayer houses right beside their homes and places of business. And so there are still a couple of places today in Krakow, like this one, that you can find. It does take it's a little bit more challenging. This synagogue is back in a courtyard. It's not publicly accessible. I actually went to school on Grodzka Street for a year, about a block away. Had no idea the synagogue was there until I started working here. But it's really important to remember that Jews were very much an integral part of the fabric of life here in Krakow, not just here in Kazimierz, but throughout the city.
In the 14th century, you have the year in your books, 1335. Our king, whose name was Kazimierz the Great, or Kazimierz Wielki, he decided to build one more town. But this, to be honest, was not a town built for Jewish people or by Jewish people. It was a town, like just one more town, additional town built next to the capital. This was already too small in the 14th century. Krakow was the capital, the most important city. So, there were lots of privileges for merchants who were living here. For example, 2 first years, they didn't have to pay taxes, So more and more people wanted to come here to live in this area. And finally, our King Kazimierz said, first of all, this is too small. We have to build one more town here, next to, somewhere close to the capital. And then, if we build one more town, more people can come, more people can live here, more people can settle down. And if more people come and work here, make money, sell different goods, more people pay taxes. And the king has more money. And that was the reason why Kazimierz was built. It wasn't built, just to make people happy. It was built so the king, wanted to make more money. This was, built, as I said, in the 14th century, and it was just like a regular town. There were city walls built here around, and a small remnant of the city walls is just here. See, this is original 14th century wall. I mean, the tiles, the wooden elements are not that old. They are, they all come from the 20th century, but the stones are original. So there were city walls built around. There was a market square here. There was a city hall. There were churches built here. And there were different, we can say, groups or different nationalities that settled down in this area. There were Polish people living here, and there were some Russian people living here. Hungarians were here. German community was here. Italians were here. Jewish people lived here already in the 14th century. By the end of the 15th century, by the way, for you it's quite easy to remember the date, 1492. In 1492, after conflicts in Krakow, in the capital, all the Jewish people moved to this area here. And they were given 35% of this town, and that's what we call as we know as the old Jewish area, old Jewish quarter, old Jewish settlement. Why there were any conflicts? First of all, there were not religious conflicts, but it was all about money, about business. Well, usually goods sold by Jews were much cheaper when the same goods were sold by anyone else. That's why there were some problems in the capital. And finally, by the end of the 15th century, one of our kings, his name was John Albert, he said, to avoid future conflicts and also to protect the Jewish community for their own safety, all the Jews should leave the capital and they should move to this town here. So that's when they were given, 35% of Kazimierz. Jewish people moved here, and it's very important to remember that this place was never a ghetto, because people were not imprisoned here. There was no wall built around. There was just, a place where they lived, but they didn't have to, stay here all the time, and they were allowed to work anywhere around. I mean, some of them worked here in the Jewish area, some of them in non-Jewish part of Kazimierz. Some still worked in Krakow, some worked in the Wawel, in the castle for the needs of our kings. They were, for example, bankers or lawyers of our royal families. The only condition was, if you want to stay close to the capital, your house can't be built in the capital. Your house has to be here. So they built houses here, they lived here, they moved, they were allowed to move to any other part of Poland. They were allowed to work everywhere they wanted, and they were allowed to travel as well. Well, in the very beginning of the 19th century, so more than 200 years ago, the riverbed was dried. The city walls of Kazimierz were pulled down. The city walls of Krakow were pulled down. Both towns were joined. And then, more than 200 years ago, Jewish people were allowed to live anywhere they wanted. And, our historians say that before World War II, most Jewish people, especially people who were very religious, Orthodox Jewish communities, also people who were not very wealthy, they rather stayed here in the old Jewish area. But those who had more money, and also quite many reformed families, they rather moved to the old town of Krakow, and they lived in the old town and some of the nearby streets. Altogether, in whole the city of Krakow, before World War II, we had nearly 70,000 Jewish people. To be more precise, 68,500 people. 68,500 Jewish people lived here. Only from nearly 70,000 people, which was, by the way, 25% of the population of Krakow, from nearly 70,000 people, only 5,000 survived. Which means about 65,000 Jewish people who lived here were killed by Nazis in different concentration camps, mainly a place called Bełżec, which was in the east of our country. About 4,000 were killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the camp which you're going to see tomorrow, and also some died in the camp of Płaszów, the one which you I think you remember from the movie The Schindler's List. If you everyone saw the movie before coming here. So if you remember the very cruel commandant of the camp, Amon Good, the one who was shooting to his prisoners from the balcony of his house, just for fun, that was the camp of Płaszów, which was outside of Krakow, that direction here. We will be passing the camp of Płaszów on the way to the salt mines. On the way from the salt mines, we will stop there, so you will see a monument commemorating victims. I will tell you more about the camp then. 5,000 Jews, those who survived, not all of them stayed here. People here in Krakow, they did not lose, we can say, properties, because, Krakow was not destroyed during the war, so houses were here, workshops were here, buildings were here, but people lost people, we can say. I mean, Jews, those who survived, nearly everyone lost, some family members, friends, neighbors. That's why quite many people decided to leave Europe after World War II, and they immigrated mostly to countries like Israel, United States, but also Canada, Australia, some South American countries. Right now the Jewish community of Krakow is really tiny, because as far as we know, according to the documents of the synagogue, we have 200 religious Jewish people in Krakow. So if you compare the numbers, 70,000 people, nearly 70,000 before the war, 200 people now, 200 people now, it's not even 1% of the population of the town. And before the war, that was 25%, they were Jewish people. It's really hard to say where Jewish people live right now, because first of all, the community is tiny, and then, please remember that all the Jewish people who live here, they are reformed. They are very modern. They don't really wear all these, traditional clothes. Men, they don't have, black hair, long black coat, they don't have pearls. Women don't cover, elbows or knees. We think that some Jewish families still live here, some of them in the other part of the city. But it's impossible to distinguish them. That's why we rather say this is the former Jewish section of the town, because I think very few Jewish families still live in this area. Well, the ghetto, which we are going to see the day after tomorrow, also coming from the salt mines, ghetto was here across the river, in a former industrial part of the city. Well, even though when you watch the movie again, The Schindler's List, you will see the ghetto was filmed here in this area, because for Spielberg it was easy. First of all, in the real ghetto, some buildings collapsed, and there were some new buildings built in the same place. Which means you will see old original buildings and also blocks of flats 10 floors high. So it was much easier to film here, and also the architecture of this place, of this area, was not changed after World War II. And when Spielberg came here, it was 19 years ago. Most houses here were, I would say, well, not in a very good shape. I mean, quite many of them were, were not restored, because it was just, a few years after communism, and in communism we just did not have too much money for the renovation. So most houses were not too clean, not too nice. It was quite easy to film the poverty of the ghetto here. So that's why Spielberg used this area with pre-war original architecture. So in the movie, the ghetto is here. The real one was just across the river, very close to here because it's only like 10 minutes walk, but the real one was across the river. By the way, Nazis decided when they invaded Poland, when they came here to Krakow, they decided to set a ghetto here because for them, river was like a natural border between, the clean old town which was taken over by Nazis and the ghetto, which was dirty because there were not enough facilities, but I will tell you more about it when we are there on Thursday. The ghetto which had diseases, which had epidemics. So the river was like a natural border between the clean and the dirty part of the city. But that was one of the reasons. Main one was, industry was here, Schindler's factory was here. Other factories were here in this area as well. So, Jewish people were forced to live in the place where they had to work. Now I would like I would like to show you a building which is just behind the map. Sure.
What's the name of the king?
Kazimierz, like here.
Oh, okay.
Kazimierz or Casimir, Latin, the Great.
Oh,
Casimir the Great or Kazimierz the Great.